Modern workplaces have anti-discrimination policies, equal pay legislation, diversity initiatives, maternity protections. On paper, the framework exists. But here is what the data keeps revealing. Decade after decade, country after country, industry after industry, the legal architecture and the lived reality are not the same thing. This video isn't about assigning blame. It's about looking at what the evidence actually shows and asking one uncomfortable question. Why, after all of this reform, does the gap keep showing up? Number 9. The biological variable. Nobody put in the productivity model. Most organizational performance models are built on a single, rarely examined assumption that all employees operate at roughly consistent energy levels, day to day, week to week. For approximately 80% of women in the workforce, that assumption is physiologically incorrect. Research consistently documents that menstruation causes fatigue, pain, and measurable cognitive slowdown in a significant portion of working women. Not occasionally, repeatedly. Throughout the entirety of a working career, a manager sees reduced energy in a morning meeting. What he doesn't see is what she is managing before she walks into the room. There is no policy for it, no formal accommodation, no established framework to even disclose to. So she performs anyway, and the gap between what is visible to the organization and what is actually happening remains exactly that. A gap. Nobody designed it, and nobody has gone back to fix it. Number 8. Pregnancy, and the assumption that changes everything. In most developed economies, pregnancy discrimination is explicitly illegal. The law is unambiguous, and yet, studies document a remarkably consistent pattern across geographies and industries. Following a pregnancy announcement, something in how an employee is managed shifts quietly. High visibility assignments are reduced. Long-term commitment gets silently questioned. Promotion trajectories slow. None of this is written down anywhere. That's the point. Researchers have a specific term for it. Covert bias. The belief shapes the decision before anyone reaches for a policy manual. The law covers what can be proven in writing. Covert bias rarely produces written evidence. A 2021 report by the UK's Equality and Human Rights Commission found that around 54,000 women a year lose their jobs as a direct result of pregnancy or maternity inside one of the strongest legal frameworks in the world. If the law is catching some of it and the number is still 54,000, the question is what the law isn't catching. Number 7. The return to work. The gap. Nobody budgets for an employee goes on maternity leave. She returns. The organization marks her status as active. On paper, everything is normal. What is actually happening on the other side of that is considerably more complex. Research documents that employees returning from maternity leave commonly manage chronic sleep deprivation, ongoing physical recovery, hormonal adjustment, and primary caregiving responsibilities simultaneously inside an unchanged performance environment. No transition window, no recalibration. The systems model simply has no variable for any of it. Postpartum depression compounds this further. The World Health Organization estimates it affects 10 to 20% of mothers globally. It is rarely disclosed at work because disclosure is perceived, usually correctly, as professionally risky. So when its effects surface in the form of reduced output or difficulty concentrating, they frequently get misread. Not as a medical condition, as a performance problem. That misreading goes into a file. It shapes the next review. It influences the next promotion decision. A medical condition becomes a career variable, quietly, permanently, with no one in the organization aware that's what just happened. Number 6. The pay gap. The number everyone argues about and few actually examine. The gender pay gap is probably the most debated statistic in modern labor economics. It's real. It's also layered, and the argument around it almost always misses the dimension that actually matters. The global figure sits at roughly 20 to 23%. In developed economies, it narrows, but it doesn't close anywhere. But the gap at a single point in time isn't the problem. The compounding is. A lower starting salary means every percentage-based raise applies to a smaller base. Fewer promotions mean fewer jumps in compensation tier. Smaller bonuses accumulate differently over decades. A 2019 analysis by the Institute for Women's Policy Research estimated that over a 40-year career, the accumulated earnings gap for a full-time female worker in the United States reaches approximately $400,000 compared to a male counterpart in an equivalent role. $400,000. Not from one decision, from 1,000 small ones, none of them dramatic, all of them quietly compounding in the same direction. Number 5. The broken rung, where the pipeline actually leaks. The dominant narrative around gender inequality in leadership focuses on the glass ceiling. Barriers at the top. It's a compelling image. It's also pointing at the wrong place. McKinsey and Leanin.org's Women in the Workplace report documents what it calls the broken rung. For every 100 men promoted from entry level to their first management role, only around 80 to 87 women make the same move. Not at the executive level, at the very first step. The math from there is simple. If the leak happens at step 1, every level above it will reflect the same deficit. The glass ceiling gets the attention. The broken rung rung is where the filtering is actually happening, and almost nobody is watching it. Number 4. The competence tax. Consider what it would mean to perform at a consistently high level for years and still walk into each new context carrying a slightly higher burden of proof than the colleague beside you. Not dramatically higher, just enough to require more evidence, more time, more energy to reach the same perceived standing. Researchers Joan Williams and Rachel Dempsey documented this pattern and named it "prove it again bias." Competence demonstrated in one role doesn't automatically carry over to the next. Qualifications get questioned more frequently at the point of new assignments. The same output, attributed to different genders in controlled studies, is evaluated differently, a finding replicated across decades of research and multiple national contexts. It doesn't show up in any policy document, but it shows up in reviews, in assignments, in promotion decisions, quietly, consistently, everywhere. Number 3. The work that doesn't appear in any job description. In 1983, sociologist Arlie Hochschild introduced the concept of emotional labor, the management of feeling, as part of professional performance. 4 decades of workplace research have since documented a consistent pattern. The informal emotional maintenance of teams falls disproportionately on female employees. Managing interpersonal conflict, integrating new hires socially, absorbing client tension before it reaches the room, maintaining the relational environment that allows a team to actually function. None of this is in a job description. None of it is measured in a performance review. None of it builds a case for promotion, and yet its absence is noticed. The social cost of not doing it is not distributed equally across the team, so the incentive to keep doing it quietly, without recognition, remains in place. Time use studies confirm it consistently. Women in equivalent roles spend measurably more hours per week on these non-promotable tasks. The hours are real. The work is real. The professional return on that work is not. Number 2. Harassment and the architecture of silence. Before the numbers, a pattern worth understanding first. When workplace harassment cases surface publicly, they rarely look like isolated incidents. They look like systems that operated, largely unchecked, for years, sometimes decades. The moment of public disclosure is not the beginning of the problem, it is the point at which the silence finally broke. In 2016, Fox News anchor Gretchen Carlson filed a sexual harassment lawsuit against Chairman Roger Ailes, alleging harassment and wrongful termination. Once the case became public, more than a dozen other women came forward with parallel accounts, some of which had existed, undisclosed, for years. Carlson settled for a reported $20 million. Fox News paid over $50 million in harassment and discrimination settlements in a single fiscal year. At Uber, the EEOC found reasonable cause to believe the company had permitted an institutional culture of sexual harassment and retaliation, settling for $4.4 million, with a separate $10 million class action settlement over systemic bias in pay and promotion. At Google, a class action lawsuit filed in 2017 alleged the company systematically underpaid female software engineers and steered them into lower career tracks. Google settled in 2022 for $118 million, covering more than 15,000 women. 3 different industries, 3 organizational cultures with entirely different public identities. Same pattern. Years of internal silence, followed by legal rupture, followed by settlements that confirmed exactly what the silence had been protecting. Survey data explains why the silence holds. A substantial majority of women who experience workplace harassment never formally report it. The reasons are consistent across every study: fear of retaliation, low confidence in institutional outcomes, and a rational calculation, usually an accurate one, that disclosure carries more professional risk than absorbing it. Underreporting is not evidence that the problem is contained. It is evidence that the system disincentivizes disclosure. Those are not the same thing. Not even close. Number 1. The compounding effect and why small frictions produce large outcomes. This is the mechanism behind everything else on this list, and the one most consistently underestimated. Examine any single pressure point in isolation, and it is possible to minimize it. A performance review that weighs one recent mistake above a year of strong output. A promotion cycle where a marginally less qualified candidate moves forward. A month of managing a physical condition with no accommodation. A meeting where a contribution goes unattributed, but they don't occur once. They occur repeatedly. Across the same career, inside the same organizational systems, often without any single instance rising to the threshold of a formal complaint, or even conscious recognition by anyone involved. The research term is cumulative disadvantage. Small, recurring differentials in treatment that compound over time into significantly different outcomes. Career trajectories, lifetime earnings, leadership representation, retirement security. This is why, despite decades of legal reform and genuine organizational effort, measurable gaps across gender lines in most corporate environments remain. It is not that the policies are absent, it is that policy is designed to address discrete, identifiable incidents, while the pressure that shapes outcomes outcomes operates at the level of accumulated patterns. One is visible, the other is not. That gap between what policy can reach and what pattern produces is precisely where the unseen pressure lives. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't produce a single incident to point to. It produces a career that, over 20 or 30 years, looks quietly but measurably different from the one running alongside it. And that is exactly why it has persisted as long as it has.